The night fog curled like pale fingers around the iron railings of Blackwell Manor, swallowing the moon and muting the distant cry of an owl. Inside the brooding estate, the grandfather clock struck 11, an echo swallowed by ominous quiet. Moments later, a shattering scream tore through the halls. Servants rushed toward the library, only to find the master of the house, Lord Percival Blackwell, slumped over his desk, his face frozen in terror, his hand gripping a half-burned letter. The windows were locked from the inside. Chapter 1. The Gloom in the Hallways. The fog that curled around Blackwell Manor that night carried the miserable heaviness of an omen, dense, clinging, and suffocating. It drifted across the moorland like a living thing, swallowing lampposts, reducing old oaks to shadowy silhouettes, and transforming the winding gravel drive into a vanishing white tunnel. When Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings stepped out of the motor car, their polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth, they were greeted first by silence, deep, eerie, and broken only by the distant rumble of the sea. Hastings pulled his coat tighter across his chest, his breath rising in pale ghosts. Poirot, on the other hand, gazed up at the towering estate with narrowed eyes. Noting the Gothic stone facade, the narrow slits of light behind heavy velvet curtains, and the solitary lantern swinging in the wind like a dying star. "A house," he murmured, "into whose heart many secrets have been poured. They seep through its stones, mon ami." Hastings, somewhat less poetically inclined, muttered that all old English houses look dismal at night. Poirot gave him a slight smile. "Perhaps, but this one, I suspect, has been waiting for us." Inside the manor, the butler, tall, skeletal, his expression carved from centuries of service, ushered them into the grand foyer. The air smelled faintly of candle wax, polished mahogany, and something else, the metallic bite of dread. The entryway opened into a cavernous hall lined with ancestral portraits. Each grim Blackwell ancestor, preserved in dark oils, stared out with an almost accusatory intensity, as if displeased to witness outsiders intruding upon family disaster. Their eyes followed Poirot and Hastings as they crossed the marble floor, passing beneath a chandelier whose crystals shivered with the faintest draught. Far off, a grandfather clock tolled a slow, resonant chime. 11 o'clock. Its echo drifted through hallways that stretched like arteries deeper into the manor's body. The butler spoke quietly. "Inspector Howick awaits you in the library, sirs." Poirot replied with a polite nod, but paused a moment to study the trembling crystal drops of the chandelier, the faint trail of mud near the base of the staircase, and the lingering scent of burnt paper that seemed oddly out of place in such a meticulously maintained home. As they approached the library, Poirot touched Hastings lightly on the arm. "Observe, mon ami," he whispered. "Not all is as tranquil as the household would wish us to believe." Hastings frowned. "Well, someone has died, after all." Poirot gave a thoughtful tilt of the head. "Ah, but the death alone does not create such atmospheric disorder. None. There is more." They stepped into the library to find Inspector Howick waiting beside the large oak desk, where Lord Percival Blackwell sat slumped, his head angled downward, one cheek resting on a sheaf of papers soaked with spilled ink. The fire in the hearth had died to embers, casting a low, pulsing glow that turned shadows into creatures. Hastings inhaled sharply at the sight. Poirot stepped forward slowly, his expression solemn yet inquisitive. Lord Blackwell's face was pale, not the pallor of sleep, but of a man who had met terror in his final moments. His eyes were half open, frozen in a stare that seemed to look past the room, beyond the walls, beyond the present entirely. His right hand remained clenched around a half-burned scrap of paper, its edges blackened and still faintly warm. The wastebasket beside the desk held the charred remnants of what must have been the rest of the letter. Poirot crouched and lifted a fragment between two fingertips. The ash crumbled at his touch. "Someone wished to destroy this message thoroughly," he murmured. Inspector Harwick sighed. "We found the room locked from the inside, window bolted, chimney too narrow for anything larger than a rat. No weapon, no forced entry, no struggle." He gestured helplessly. "Frankly, Monsieur Poirot, it looks impossible." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Impossible, mon cher inspecteur, is a word used by those who lack imagination." Hastings leaned in closer to study the body. "He doesn't appear stabbed or shot. Could it be poison?" Poirot, with his customary delicacy, examined Lord Blackwell's neck, collar and hands. Then something caught his attention. A tiny dot near the base of the jawline. Barely visible, almost inconsequential. Yet Poirot's expression sharpened like a blade. "Ah," he whispered softly, "bonjour, little clue." Howick frowned. "What is it?" Poirot straightened. "A puncture, very fine, very precise, administered by someone with skill." The inspector let out a low curse, rubbing his forehead. "Then we may be dealing with a professional." Poirot's gaze drifted around the room. The untouched glass of brandy on the side table, the windows sealed tight, the curtains slightly disturbed, the ink bottle toppled but with no sign of a struggle that might have caused it. "No, Inspector," he said softly. "We are dealing with someone who pretends to be one." The door creaked open, and Lady Eleanor Blackwell entered. Tall, exquisitely dressed, beautiful in a cold, unapproachable way. Her face was pale but controlled, composed with a dignity that came from years of managing public appearances. Her gloved hands trembled only slightly as she approached. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted with a voice that held both gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you for coming. This tragedy, it is unbearable." Poirot bowed his head. "Madame, you have my deepest sympathies." She looked toward her husband's body but did not step closer. "Please understand, Percival was troubled in recent months, paranoid even. He spoke of enemies, of threats, but he refused to tell me details, said it was not a matter for a woman's concern." A shadow crossed her expression. He was old-fashioned that way. Poirot studied her carefully. "And last night, madame, did he speak of danger?" Lady Eleanor hesitated. "At dinner he seemed distracted, anxious. He left the table early and locked himself in this room. He has done so before, when matters of business weighed on him." Poirot nodded, but noticed the way her eyes flicked to the burned scraps of paper, the faintest twitch of worry or recognition. "Madam," he said gently, "did you know of any letter he might have received?" She stiffened. "A letter?" Poirot held up the half-charred fragment. Lady Eleanor's lips parted slightly before she caught herself. "No, I knew nothing of it. Percival kept his correspondence private." The lie, not in the words but in the too quick breath, did not escape Poirot. He stepped away to survey the window. The condensation on the glass was untouched. Poirot pressed his fingertip lightly to an undisturbed patch. "Locked from within," he murmured. "And yet Lady Blackwell was found outside the door only minutes after the scream. Tell me, Inspector, who discovered the body first?" "A footman," Howick replied. "He heard Lady Eleanor shout for help. She claims she heard the crash from inside the hallway. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Curious. And who else resides in the house tonight? Harwick handed him a list. Lady Eleanor, Dr. Felix Marrow, the family physician, Samuel Huxley, business partner, Violet Ashcombe, maid, and Julian Blackwell, the estranged nephew recently returned. Poirot hummed thoughtfully. A full house, with full opportunities for mischief. Crossing the room once more, Poirot inspected the desk and the ink stain. "Look, Hastings," he said softly. "The ink spilled not in panic, but because the bottle sat near the edge, placed deliberately. The murderer wishes to suggest disorder, but disorder arranged too neatly becomes order again." Hastings blinked. So the scene was staged. Poirot nodded. Precisely. He then lifted Lord Blackwell's hand. The fingers were still curled around the scrap as though in desperation, but the muscles suggested rigidity, not natural clutching. "Placed," Poirot murmured. "A message framed, not left." He inhaled deeply again. There, unmistakable, the faint smell of something chemical. Not quite medicinal, not quite industrial. Something in between. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Just then, a distant thud echoed in the hallway, as though someone had knocked something over. Poirot turned quickly, listening. The butler reappeared, bowing deeply. "Apologies, sir. A miscommunication among the staff." Yet the tremor in the man's voice betrayed him. Poirot stared, long and unblinking. "Miscommunication," he repeated softly, "is rarely accompanied by fear." The butler swallowed hard. Poirot moved to the fireplace next. The embers glowed faintly, barely alive. But beneath them lay charred remains of more paper, clearly more than one letter. "The murderer was thorough," he said, "but not thorough enough." He retrieved a small half-burned corner that had slipped between two logs. On it, the writing of Lord Blackwell himself, sharp, bold, unmistakable, and a single phrase, "Meet me tonight, urgent." Poirot whispered the words aloud. Lady Eleanor flinched. Hastings took in the scene slowly. So he met someone here, in this very room, before he died? Poirot nodded. "Yes, mon ami," and he trusted them enough to grant them entry. Poirot paused, lifting the small scrap toward the dim glow of the firelight. But trust, Hastings, is the greatest vulnerability, and often the final mistake. The atmosphere deepened around them, heavy as the fog outside. The manor itself seemed to tighten, creaking faintly as though holding its breath. Poirot took one last sweep of the room, his gaze analytical, methodical, precise. "We must speak with each member of the household," he announced, "for one among them is lying. And not merely to protect themselves, but to conceal the truth that drove Lord Blackwell to his death." Hastings nodded gravely. Lady Eleanor's hands trembled. Inspector Howick exhaled shakily. The butler, though silent, hovered like a ghost near the doorway. Poirot walked back toward the body and gently touched the puncture wound once more. "A needle," he whispered, "a toxin, administered with the expertise of someone familiar with such tools, yet hidden by someone equally familiar with deceit." He stood adjusting his cuffs. The shadows of the library stretched across the room like dark claws. Poirot's eyes glinted. "The murderer," he said softly, "walks still among us." Chapter 2. The Letter in Ashes. The hours following the grim discovery in the library passed like slow-moving shadows across Blackwell Manor, each minute stretching with the weight of apprehension. Poirot, after conducting his initial examination, insisted on temporarily sealing the room, an instruction met with visible discomfort by Inspector Harwick, who clearly disliked surrendering control to the Belgian detective. And yet, Harwick could not deny that Poirot had already unearthed more in 10 minutes than the local police had in 2 hours. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the leaded windows like a suffocating blanket. And the manor's old bones creaked as though unsettled by the presence of fear. Poirot and Hastings relocated to a smaller sitting room, where a weak fire struggled to brighten the sombre atmosphere. In the hearth's dim glow, Poirot seemed to retreat into deep contemplation. Elbows resting lightly on the armrests, fingertips touching delicately beneath his chin. Hastings paced restlessly, unable to shake the image of Lord Blackwell's lifeless stare. "Poirot," Hastings said at last, "about that letter fragment. What do you suppose it meant? Someone he trusted, perhaps?" Poirot opened his eyes slowly. "Every letter, mon ami, is a whisper from one soul to another. In this case, the whisper was cut short, burned before its message could reach the light." He withdrew the half-burned scrap from his pocket. The once bold ink now appeared faint and fragmented, but the phrase lingered unmistakably. "Meet me tonight, urgent." Poirot held it as one might hold a fragile wing of an insect. "A rendezvous arranged for the night of his death," he murmured, and someone wished very much that its contents would vanish. Before Hastings could respond, the door opened and Dr. Felix Marrow entered, his long coat still dusted with the mist from outside, spectacles slightly fogged. He looked like a man plagued by sleeplessness, his sharp cheekbones drawn and his hands peculiarly restless at his sides. "Inspector Harwick said you wanted to speak with me," he said in a low voice, his eyes flicking nervously from Poirot to Hastings. Poirot gestured to a chair. "Please, doctor, sit. Your expertise may prove most illuminating." Marrow sat stiffly, fingers tapping against his knee. I've attended to Lord Blackwell for years. Heart strain, occasional insomnia, nothing more significant." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet his death, docteur, is not consistent with a failing heart, nor with natural slumber. You saw the puncture wound." Marrow swallowed hard. "A mosquito bite, perhaps. The marshland breeds them. Particularly in summer, perhaps. It is November," Poirot said gently. "The marsh sleeps as the insects sleep. Try again, docteur." Marrow's lips tightened in a thin line. Instead of offering a straight answer, he began adjusting his spectacles again, a nervous tick Poirot did not miss. "Look," he said strainedly, "Percival, Lord Blackwell, had enemies, I won't deny it. His business dealings were complicated." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Complicated in what way?" Marrow exhaled shakily. "He and Samuel Huxley, his partner, have been at each other's throats for months. Investments gone wrong. Accusations, blackmail, possibly." He hesitated. He may have received threatening letters. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You say this with certainty?" Marrow avoided his gaze. "I noticed scraps, burn marks, on his desk last week." Poirot sat forward. "Burning letters, docteur, is a very particular habit. A man burns what he fears, or what he cannot allow others to see." Before Poirot could continue his questioning, the door flew open once more, and Samuel Huxley stormed in, a stout man with a square jaw, mottled complexion, and the look of someone perpetually irritated by life. He removed his gloves with hurried, jerky movements. "What's the meaning of this, Marrow? Telling tales again?" Dr. Marrow stiffened, his defensiveness suddenly draining away into a look of fear. "I simply answered a question." "You're trying to pin this on me," Huxley snapped. His breath smelled strongly of whiskey, though the decanter in the room had remained untouched. Poirot rose with a graceful firmness. Monsieur Huxley, please. We discuss facts, not accusations. Sit. You have questions to answer as well." Huxley glared, but sank heavily into a chair. His posture was slouched, but his eyes darted around the room like those of a trapped animal. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot began, "were your financial disputes with Lord Blackwell as grave as the good doctor suggests?" Huxley scoffed. "Disputes? He was bleeding the company dry with reckless acquisitions, mining ventures that failed, factories that emptied our treasury faster than we could refill it. I told him so, but he wouldn't listen, said he was building a legacy." Huxley leaned forward, voice lowering to a bitter growl. "A legacy of ruins." Poirot observed him calmly. "And did you meet with Lord Blackwell tonight?" Huxley twitched. His gaze dropped to the floor. "No," he muttered. "I stayed in my guest room. Went to bed early. Did anyone see you, monsieur?" Huxley tensed. "No." Poirot folded his hands. "Convenient. Are you implying something?" Huxley demanded. Poirot shook his head. "I imply nothing. I only observe." The tension in the room coiled like smoke. Poirot stood and moved toward the fireplace, where a faint trace of burnt parchment still perfumed the air. Hastings, now seated beside the window, listened intently. Poirot retrieved another small scrap he had saved from the ashes, a fragment so small that it held only 3 letters jagged at the edges. Jules. Poirot held it up between his fingertips. "Monsieur Huxley," he said, "do you know anyone whose name begins in this fashion?" Huxley blinked in surprise. "Jules? That'd be Julian Blackwell, the nephew." Marrow looked startled. "Julian, but he arrived only hours ago." Poirot nodded slowly. "And yet the letter suggests Lord Blackwell had arranged a meeting with someone whose name begins thus." Huxley snorted. "Well, Julian's always been trouble. Ran off years ago. Gambling debts, drink fights in cheap clubs. Maybe he came back for money." Poirot's eyes took on a contemplative glimmer. "Perhaps." He pocketed the scrap and turned back toward his chair. "Monsieur Huxley, one final question. Did Lord Blackwell ever confide in you about threats? From business rivals, employees, family?" Huxley hesitated only a fraction. He mentioned someone was after him. Said it wasn't business, wasn't money, but something older. Something he could no longer keep hidden. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Older? Fascinating." Huxley shifted uneasily. "Look, I had nothing to do with his death. I may have shouted at him earlier this week, but that's all." Poirot inclined his head. "We shall see." Huxley and Marrow left the room moments later, each looking as though they wanted distance from one another. Poirot waited until their footsteps faded before speaking. "Hastings," he murmured, "each man lies, but each lies in a different way." Hastings approached. "What do you mean?" Poirot motioned toward the fireplace. "Dr. Marrow knows more about that puncture wound than he wishes to admit. His evasion speaks volumes. Monsieur Huxley lies from anger, impulsively, without finesse, and Lady Eleanor lies from fear. We must determine, fear of what?" Hastings frowned thoughtfully. "You think she's covering for someone?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, or perhaps she covers for herself." Moments later, the door cracked open again, this time timidly. Violet Ashcombe, the young maid, stepped inside. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her posture rigid with nervousness. She clutched a folded apron to her chest as if it were armor. Monsieur Poirot, they said you wished to speak with me." Poirot stood gently. "Oui. Do come in, mademoiselle. There is nothing to fear from Hercule Poirot." Violet's hands trembled. Sir, I don't know anything useful, I swear it." Poirot guided her to the chair with exaggerated kindness. Let us see. Tell me, did you observe Lord Blackwell receiving any letters tonight, or burning any?" Violet's breath quickened. I heard raised voices. He was speaking with someone before he shut himself in. I could not hear the other person clearly, but his lordship sounded frightened, angry too." Poirot knelt beside her. "Can you recall anything of the voice? Was it male, female?" Violet hesitated. It was low, sort of hushed. I think it might have been Mr. Huxley." Poirot studied her closely. "You are not certain?" Violet shook her head violently. "No, sir. It might have been someone else. The halls echo terribly at night." Poirot's fingertips tapped together as he considered her words. "And after Lord Blackwell locked himself in the library?" Violet swallowed. "I went to the kitchen, then, maybe 20 minutes later, I heard the scream." Hastings interjected. "Scream? From whom?" Violet's face paled. "Lady Eleanor's. She was the one who found him." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Curious. That contradicts the earlier account." He dismissed Violet with a gentle nod. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." When she fled the room, Poirot stood silently for several moments. The fire crackled faintly. Hastings felt the air tighten with the weight of Poirot's thoughts. At last, Poirot spoke. "The letter, Hastings. The burned letter. It holds the key. But who destroyed it? The murderer, certainly. But I believe someone else saw it before the flames consumed it." Poirot walked to the window, staring out at the fog-choked garden. Someone knew Lord Blackwell feared for his life. Someone knew he planned to meet another person tonight. Someone who believed that if the letter survived, it would expose them. Hastings blinked. "Do you think the murderer was the one he arranged to meet?" Poirot murmured, "It is possible, but we must ask ourselves, why burn the letter? Why leave a scrap, just enough to hint at a name?" Poirot turned, eyes shining like sharpened steel. "Because the murderer wanted suspicion to fall elsewhere." He crossed the room, retrieving the scrap from his pocket once more. "Why, Hastings, does one leave only the letters Jules? Why not burn the whole thing?" Hastings thought for a moment. "To frame Julian?" Poirot nodded slowly. But Julian was not even known to be returning tonight. Only Lord Blackwell knew, and someone very close to him. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the Grand Hall chimed midnight. Its echo rolled through the manor like a dirge. Poirot glanced toward the door. "Come, Hastings, the little grey cells have begun their whispering." He lifted the scrap of burned paper, its edges blackened, its meaning half hidden. "Somewhere in these ashes," Poirot said softly, "lies the truth." And as he extinguished the lamp and stepped into the gloom-filled hallway, the vast manor seemed to lean inward, listening, waiting. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Fog. The morning broke with a thin metallic light that slid across the moors like a reluctant intruder. The fog lingered still, coiling in pale ribbons around the manor grounds. Hercule Poirot, for all his distaste for chill and damp, stepped out with the deliberateness of a man convinced the air itself held testimony. His small patent leather shoes clicked crisply against the frost-hardened gravel as he surveyed the environment with narrowed, contemplative eyes. To anyone observing, he appeared a portrait of calm, yet within, the little grey cells stirred with quiet agitation. A locked veranda, a dead man within it, 3 guests who lied by omission, if not by intent. Poirot found such riddles invigorating. Mysterious, yes, and yet he suspected profoundly human. He paused, leaning forward. A faint indentation in the frost on the wooden veranda step. Barely visible, and fresh, not from last night. "Certainement," he murmured. "Our murderer, or someone with much to hide, has not slept well. As he turned back toward the manor, Mrs. Ashcombe's figure materialized through the fog like a spectre of domestic tension. Her posture was prim, corseted even, but her composure was cracked today. She bore a tray of tea, though its rattle betrayed her nerves. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted him stiffly, "I thought you'd prefer warmth to wandering the grounds in this dreadful weather." Poirot bowed his head courteously. "You are most considerate. But I must take the air where the truth hides. One never knows what may reveal itself." She swallowed, uncertain. You found something?" "Perhaps," he smiled benignly, "and perhaps not. I make no conclusions before the facts compel me." Her hands tightened around the tray. "The facts," she whispered, "are already unbearable." Poirot tilted his head. "You speak as if guilt burdens you." Her eyes widened, not with offence, but with fear. "No, I meant only that a man is dead. Naturally, we are all unsettled." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then gestured gently. "Perhaps the tea, madame." She exhaled a trembling breath, nodding. Poirot followed her inside, noting, without appearing to, the faint scent of lavender water clinging to her. Last night, that same scent had lingered on the broken lock of the veranda door. Curious. The drawing room had changed since yesterday. More precisely, the people within it had. Elliot Graves sat rigidly by the fireplace, his eyes fixed not on the flames, but on the small amber bottle he rolled between his fingers. A sedative, or so he claimed. Diana Marwood lingered by the rain-streaked window, her silhouette carved dramatically against the pallid morning light. Frederick Holt paced the rug like a caged beast, glancing often at the door, the windows, the shadows, as though anticipating arrest or ambush. Poirot entered with Mrs. Ashcombe trailing him. Instantly, the room sharpened. Elliot tucked the bottle into his pocket. Diana straightened her posture, face smoothing into poise. Holt's pacing ceased. Poirot delighted inwardly. Their nerves sang to him like out-of-tune violins. "My friends," he began, "you will forgive another intrusion, but the truth, she demands conversation." Diana's lips curled politely. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I imagine Inspector Leclerc will be returning soon with formal inquiries." "Indeed," Poirot replied. "But before his arrival, it is sometimes useful to speak in a manner more informal. The tongue loosens when unburdened by fear of officialdom." Holt muttered, "Some of us have nothing to hide." Poirot's brow arched with delicate skepticism. "Naturally, monsieur. Then you will not object to some questions." Holt said nothing. "Bon," said Poirot. "Let us begin." He approached Diana first. Her gown was impeccably tailored, though her hair bore a single misplaced strand, a detail unlikely in one as meticulously composed as she. "Madame Marwood," he said softly, "you told me last night you retired. Early. But early is a vague word. You see, the constable informs me he saw a light under your door at nearly midnight." Her eyes flicked, only slightly, but enough. "I have difficulty sleeping," she replied coolly. "I often sit awake reading." "Ah, and what did you read?" She hesitated. "A travel memoir. And may I ask its title?" Another pause, longer this time. I don't recall." Poirot smiled gently. "Forgive me, madame, but I find it unusual that one forgets the name of a book one spent half the night reading." She bit her lip, the first crack in her composure. "Fine," she said. "I wasn't reading. I was speaking with someone." "Someone?" Poirot repeated. "I'm not obliged to say with whom." Poirot inclined his head. "You are not. But secrecy, madame, often masks fear, and fear she often accompanies guilt. Diana looked away, her knuckles whitening. Poirot turned next to Elliot Graves. Monsieur Graves, this sedative, he gestured toward Elliot's pocket, it is prescribed? Elliot stiffened. It is harmless, a sleeping draught. I've taken it for years. Curious, said Poirot lightly, for the label is newly issued, only 3 days old. Yet you say you have taken it for years. I find this contradiction most intriguing. Graves blanched. That prescription was renewed. The date means nothing. Perhaps, Poirot replied, or perhaps it means everything. Elliot's jaw clenched. I did not kill Arthur Blackwood. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. An innocent man rarely answers a question before it is asked. A flush of panic crossed Elliot's face. Finally, Poirot turned his attention to Holt, whose agitation had grown palpable. Monsieur Holt, Poirot said softly, you claim you were asleep in your room. Yet this morning, outside the veranda, I found a footprint, the stride heavy, the sole pattern coarse, the tread very much like the boots you wear. Holt's face darkened. Are you accusing me? I accuse nothing. I merely observe. You understand the difference? Holt swallowed audibly. Poirot walked a slow circle around him. Tell me, did you leave your room last night? No, Holt said too quickly. Poirot's gaze sharpened. The truth, monsieur. She knocks. Open the door. Holt's fists clenched. His breath grew shallow. Before he could speak, Diana suddenly interjected, voice slicing through the tension. Enough, Monsieur Poirot. You speak to us as if we are all criminals. Poirot turned to her calmly. If none of you are criminals, then the questions, they cause no harm. But if one among you hides a terrible secret, he tapped his temple, the little grey cells will find it. A heavy silence smothered the room. Fog pressed against the windows like a listening presence. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and delivered the final note of the morning. Arthur Blackwood did not die by happenstance. He was murdered by someone who understands this house, this landscape, and this group. Within these walls stands the truth. His voice grew quiet, almost ominous. And the murderer, he grows afraid. The three suspects shifted, each swallowing some private dread. Poirot stepped toward the door. One more thing, he said gently, turning back. Each of you has lied to me already. A small lie, perhaps, but lies, they are like pebbles in a stream. They alter the course of the water. He paused. And I will uncover where your lies lead. Poirot left them in silence, each suspect staring at the others, the fog outside thickening like a tightening noose. The moors swallowed his silhouette as he stepped into the chill air once more, his mind alight with patterns. Footprints, bottles, secrets whispered at midnight. Yet even Poirot could not foresee what awaited him next. For somewhere in the fog, someone watched him, and someone whispered, "He knows too much." Chapter 4. Whispers behind the door. The corridors of Blackwood Manor were still as a mausoleum when Poirot re-entered them. A draught moaned faintly through the hall, disturbing the heavy drapery and sending an uneasy shiver along the walls. The manor was waking slowly, reluctantly, like a creature coaxed out of slumber and into dread. Poirot paused outside Arthur Blackwood's study. The door remained sealed by official order. A brass ribbon stretched across like a funeral sash. But Poirot was not the sort to let a ribbon, or an inspector's caution, interrupt his thought. He examined the door with the delicacy of a jeweller studying a flawed gem. His fingers traced the grain of the wood. Yes, there. A hairline scratch at the lock's edge, barely visible unless the light struck just so. Someone had tampered with it, and not last night. Earlier, perhaps days earlier. Poirot hummed softly. It is not the event of last night alone that we must understand, but the days leading to it. His fingertip brushed another trace, a dark smudge partly rubbed away. Graphite? Polishing residue? No, the faint metallic tang suggested gun oil. But Arthur Blackwood had not been shot. So why gun oil here? Poirot crouched, peering closer. The smudge was too deliberate to be accidental. Someone had handled a firearm recently. Someone who had touched this very door. He rose slowly, the little grey cells vibrating with new possibilities. It becomes more interesting, n'est-ce pas? As he made his way toward the breakfast room, Poirot heard voices, hushed, trembling, urgent. He stopped just short of the archway, careful not to reveal himself. Diana Marwood's voice floated first, brittle as cracked glass. "You cannot keep this up, Elliot. He will see through you." "I have done nothing wrong," Elliot hissed back, though his voice broke, betraying a fracture beneath. "Poirot suspects me because he sees ghosts in every shadow. He sees truth," Diana said, "and you know it." Poirot edged closer, silent as a drifting thought. Elliot inhaled sharply. "If you mean to turn on me, Diana, I mean to survive," she cut in. "Last night you were not in your room. I heard footsteps in the hall. Heavy ones. You weren't pacing then. You were going somewhere." A tense silence hung. "I warn you," Elliot said, voice a low tremor. "If you repeat that—" "What?" Diana challenged. "Will you frighten me? I'm already frightened." Poirot stepped forward deliberately and entered the room. Both froze. Diana's composure vanished like steam. Elliot's hands shook so violently that the teacup rattled against its saucer. "Monsieur Poirot," Diana breathed, "we didn't hear you." "Forgive me," Poirot replied calmly. "I intrude, but it seems I have entered at a moment of delicate conversation." Elliot's face paled. "We were discussing nothing relevant." Poirot raised a hand. "On the contrary, monsieur, the very tone of your voices suggests it was most relevant indeed." Diana sat down, shoulders sagging. Her facade of elegance slipped, revealing exhaustion beneath. "We are frightened, Monsieur Poirot. Is that so strange?" "No," Poirot said. "Fear is the most common visitor during murder." She arrived swiftly and without invitation. Poirot turned to Elliot. "Monsieur Graves, you left your room last night. I now consider it not a theory but a certainty." Elliot swallowed. "You have no proof." "Non," Poirot said gently. "But your footsteps, they tell the story. As does your voice, which trembles not with grief, but with dread." Elliot broke then, sinking into a chair, head in hands. I cannot tell you where I went." "Because it would incriminate you?" Poirot asked softly. "No," Elliot rasped, "because it would incriminate someone else." Poirot leaned forward. "Then you must choose, monsieur. Protecting the wrong person may lead you to the gallows." Elliot's shoulders curled inward. A man folding into himself. "I need time," he whispered. Poirot nodded once. "Time, monsieur. She is generous to no one. But for the moment, I grant you this request." His eyes flicked to Diana. "And you, madame? You spoke last night with someone. Perhaps with Monsieur Graves?" Her breath hitched. "No." "Then with whom?" She pressed a hand to her throat. "I cannot say. It will ruin them." Poirot exhaled quietly. "Then someone is being ruined in the dark so that another may be spared in the light. This is the nature of secrets. But secrets, they are fragile things. Too much pressure. Poof! They shatter. Both suspects looked away. Poirot stepped back. "I thank you both. I shall not push further for now. But keep this in mind. The truth, she moves whether we help her or not." He turned and left them trembling in silence. Outside, the fog had thinned, replaced by a wan beam of winter sun infiltrating the manor's gloom. Poirot followed it toward the east wing, where a narrow passage led to Arthur Blackwood's private balcony. A place few ventured, for the cold wind cut sharp as glass there. But Poirot felt drawn to it. The balcony door creaked open under his touch, its hinges groaning like an old confession. The frigid air seized him instantly, but he stepped forward anyway. Below him stretched the moors, wide, bleak, ancient, a landscape of secrets older than the manor itself. And yet it was not the moors that captured his attention. It was the balcony railing. A single thread dangled from a splinter, a dark, fine fibre, almost invisible. Poirot plucked it delicately. Wool, very high quality, blue, midnight blue, much like Frederick Holt's overcoat. Poirot pocketed the thread, his mind already assembling possibilities. Holt had lied, of that he was certain, but the thread alone could point to anything. A struggle, a covert meeting, an attempt to flee, or the simple misfortune of a coat brushing against a rail. But Poirot's instincts whispered otherwise. This was no accident. As he stepped back inside, something clinked faintly under his shoe. He stooped and retrieved it. A cufflink, gold, engraved with the letter M. Poirot's breath stilled. Not Holt, not Graves, Marwood, Diana Marwood. M for Marwood, he murmured, or M for murder. It was too convenient, too perfectly placed. A red herring, perhaps, or a taunt. Poirot straightened, pocketed the cufflink, and closed the balcony door with a decisive click. One thing was certain now. The murderer was no longer merely hiding. They were circling, preparing, and the next move would be theirs. Chapter 5. The confession at dusk. Dusk seeped across the moors like spilled ink as Poirot returned to the main hall. The manor's lamps had been lit early, thin flames trembling behind frosted sconces. Yet the corridors somehow felt darker than before, as though the walls absorbed more shadow with every hour. Poirot paused on the central staircase, glancing down at the polished banister. A distorted reflection of his own face stared back at him in the gleam of mahogany. A reminder that even appearances, like alibis, could deceive. He removed the golden cufflink from his pocket and studied it once more. The letter M glimmered faintly. Diana Marwood, or someone who wished her implicated. Poirot's lips pursed. It was too obvious, too theatrically placed. Murderers rarely left monograms behind, unless they wished to shepherd the investigation down a false path. And yet, sometimes the simplest clues were the most truthful. The little grey cells hummed uneasily. From the far end of the hall came the soft click of a door. Poirot straightened. Frederick Holt stepped out of the library. His jaw was set, his eyes restless and shadowed. When he noticed Poirot, he froze mid-step, like a stag catching the scent of a hunter. Poirot approached with measured steps. "Monsieur Holt," he greeted pleasantly. "A moment, if you please." Holt tensed. "If this is about that footprint, it is about everything," Poirot interrupted gently. "You walk the halls with the agitation of a man whose conscience is knocking loudly?" Holt's throat worked. "I don't have to answer to you." "No," Poirot agreed. "You do not. But a man who does not speak risks being spoken for by the evidence he has left behind. And evidence, monsieur, She can be a most unforgiving witness." Holt looked away, jaw flexing. "What do you want?" "Truth," Poirot said simply. "The truth of where you were last night." Holt hesitated, then motioned sharply toward the library. "Fine, not here." Poirot followed him inside. The library smelled of aging paper and quiet secrets. Tall shelves loomed like silent judges. Holt closed the door and pressed his back against it as though holding something unseen at bay. He exhaled heavily. "I didn't kill him." Poirot nodded. "Then share your truth, monsieur." Holt rubbed a hand over his face. "I was outside, on the grounds." "Near the veranda?" Poirot asked lightly. Holt flinched. "Yes. And why were you there?" Holt's gaze hardened. "Because Arthur Blackwood demanded money I didn't have. He threatened to expose something from my past." "Something criminal?" "No," Holt snapped. "But enough to ruin me. I came to confront him, yes, but when I arrived, he was already dead." Poirot studied the man's features. The twitch at the corner of the eye, the tremor in the hand, the quiet desperation woven into every word. "Why not tell this to Inspector Leclerc?" Poirot asked softly. "Because who would believe me?" Holt barked. "I'm the one with the temper, the one with a history of trouble. And Arthur delighted in reminding me of that." Poirot considered this. "You expected to meet him outside the veranda?" Holt nodded. "He said he'd wait for me there, but—" Holt's voice cracked. "He never opened the door." Poirot's mind clicked. A planned meeting, a private confrontation. Arthur Blackwood had intended a secret rendezvous with Holt, but someone else had reached him first. "Did you see anyone?" Poirot asked. "No," Holt said helplessly. "Only fog, and then shadows moving near the eastern side of the house. But when I followed, nothing." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Shadows? One or multiple?" "One," Holt replied. "I think. Tall, small, man or woman. It moved fast. Could have been either." Poirot took a slow breath. The picture was growing, forming shape, but the edges remained hazy. "Merci, Monsieur Holt," he said. "This is helpful." Holt looked stunned. "You believe me?" "I believe," Poirot answered gently. "The truth often trembles on the lips before it is spoken. You tremble, yes, but not with guilt." Relief flashed across Holt's face, only for dread to replace it. "Then someone else set me up." Poirot pocketed the cufflink once more. "Perhaps, monsieur. Perhaps indeed." As Poirot exited the library, the house seemed to shift subtly, like a vast creature turning in its sleep. Diana Marwood appeared at the top of the stairs, poised yet pale. Her gown trailed behind her like spilled moonlight. She descended with unhurried grace, hands clasped tightly before her. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I must speak with you privately." Poirot inclined his head. "But of course, madame." They stepped into a small, unused salon, where the furniture slumbered beneath white sheets. Diana closed the door with trembling fingers. Her composure cracked instantly. "I cannot bear this any longer," she whispered. "Someone is trying to ruin me." Poirot's gaze softened. "Then tell me what you withheld." Diana swallowed. "Last night, I met with Arthur." Poirot blinked. "Arthur Blackwood?" "Yes." Her voice shook. "He summoned me. He said he had something to reveal, something that concerned me deeply." Poirot stepped closer. "And did he reveal it?" She shook her head violently. Tears gathered, glistening. "When I arrived at his study, he was alive, angry. He said he had discovered a secret about my family, something that would change everything. He refused to tell me unless I agreed to—" She broke off. Poirot's voice softened. "To what, madame?" To support him, she whispered, financially, publicly. He tried to extort me. Poirot's brows rose. And you refused? Of course I refused, she cried. I stormed out. I never saw him again. Poirot's mind flashed. The cufflink, the balcony, the midnight conversation she refused to name, secrets, each suspect drowning in them. Madame, Poirot said gently, did Arthur mention any names, any enemies, anyone he feared? She wiped her cheek. Just one. He said someone in this house would do anything to silence him. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Who? Diana hesitated, then whispered Elliot. Poirot stilled. Elliot Graves, the trembling man with the new prescription, the one who protected an unnamed person, the one who walked the halls at midnight. Before Poirot could question further, a loud crash echoed through the house, somewhere near the east wing. Diana gasped. Poirot turned sharply. Stay here, madame, he said, and strode towards the sound, footsteps echoing like a ticking clock. The manor had made its next move. And whatever had fallen, or whoever, was waiting in the shadows ahead. Chapter 6. The Man in the East Wing. The crash resounded through the halls like a gunshot muffled by stone. Poirot quickened his pace, tapping along the corridor with swift, purposeful steps. The manor seemed to tense around him, wooden beams groaning, wall sconces flickering, as if the house itself braced for revelation. The east wing was colder than the rest, its air tinged with dust and disuse. Few rooms here were inhabited. Arthur Blackwood had preferred seclusion for certain private activities that Poirot suspected were far from benign. As he approached the end of the corridor, the silence thickened, coiling into an almost tangible hush. Poirot paused, listening. A faint groan drifted from behind a half-open door. He nudged it wider. Inside, the room lay in half-darkness. Shelves toppled, books splayed across the rug like scattered feathers. A chair lay overturned. And on the floor, crumpled beside a fallen brass lamp, was Elliot Graves. His breathing came in shuddering gasps. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, kneeling swiftly. Monsieur Graves, speak to me. What has happened? Elliot winced, clutching his side. I slipped. The shelves fell. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The explanation was too pat, too rehearsed, and the angle of the fallen furniture contradicted it. These shelves had not collapsed by accident. Someone had pushed them. Who was here with you? Poirot asked quietly. Elliot's pupils shrank with sudden fear. No one. Poirot tilted his head. Monsieur, you are injured, terrified and lying. This is not a good combination for a man already suspected of secrets. Elliot's breath quickened. I wasn't attacked. So you say, but the bruising tells another story. He reached gently toward Elliot's wrist, where faint scrape marks formed a fresh pattern. Someone had gripped him tightly, too tightly. Poirot's tone softened, not unkind. Why protect someone who meant you harm? Elliot looked away, jaw trembling. Because it was my fault. I provoked them. Poirot froze. Them? Elliot's silence confirmed it. Not a burglar, not an intruder, someone in the manor. Poirot helped him sit against the wall. Monsieur Graves, I found something on the balcony, a cufflink, marked with an M. Elliot flinched violently. Poirot leaned closer. Does this signify to you? Elliot's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like a drowning man refusing a lifeline, choosing instead the suffocating weight of the water. I can't, he whispered. I cannot betray them. Poirot folded his hands. Then I must deduce without your help. But understand this. Protecting the guilty does not shield the innocent. It endangers them. Elliot's eyes glistened. Despair warred with some fierce, unspoken loyalty. Monsieur Poirot, he whispered, please leave me. I I need a moment." Poirot stood. "I will summon Mrs. Ashcombe to attend to your injuries. Do not attempt to leave the manor." Elliot did not answer. Poirot stepped back into the corridor, closing the door gently behind him. The cold air of the hallway bit sharper now, carrying with it the faint scent of dust, old paper, and something metallic. Poirot inhaled. Blood. Not much, but enough. He followed the trail, a faint smear on the doorframe, another along the wainscoting, leading toward a narrow servant stairwell seldom used. The steps creaked under Poirot's weight. A draught whispered like a warning. Halfway down, he spotted a glimmer, a drop of dark drying red on the railing. Poirot continued, emerging into a tight, dim corridor leading toward the back pantry. But before he reached it, a voice drifted from the gloom. "So, he found you then?" Poirot froze. From the shadows stepped Mrs. Ashcombe. Her face was ashen, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, hands trembling as she clutched a folded cloth. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "you were listening." Her throat bobbed. I heard the crash. I came to see if he was hurt." Poirot's eyes lowered to the cloth in her hands. A cloth stained with blood. "Madame," he said, "you have something to explain." Mrs. Ashcombe's breath shuddered. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, you mustn't frighten him further. Elliot is fragile." Poirot lifted a brow. "Fragile men do not topple shelves, nor do they leave blood in stairwells." Her lips parted, but no words came. Poirot stepped closer. "You care for him," he observed, "deeply." Her eyes filled. "He is my nephew." Poirot's eyes snapped wide. "Votre nephew, but your name changed by marriage," she whispered. "He begged me not to tell anyone. He wanted to stand on his own merits, not be known as the caretaker's kin." Poirot considered her anew. Protective, watchful, secretive, and someone who had free access to every corner of the manor. "Why did Elliot come to the East Wing?" Poirot asked. Mrs. Ashcombe hesitated. "Because he feared something. He told me Arthur knew a secret about his past. Something dangerous." Poirot frowned. "Dangerous to whom?" She looked away. "To Diana Marwood." Poirot stilled. Madame Marwood again. The cufflink, the balcony, the midnight meeting. "Mrs. Ashcombe," Poirot said gently, "who attacked Elliot?" She flinched. "I told you, no one attacked him." Poirot stepped past her and opened the door to the pantry. Inside lay a small smear of blood on the floor. Fresh. Poirot's voice sharpened. "Madame, enough, the truth." Her shoulders sagged, unraveling. "Finally," she whispered, "he wasn't attacked, he fought." Poirot blinked. "Fought with whom?" "Arthur," she choked. "He fought with Arthur Blackwood the night before he died." Poirot's pulse quickened. "The night before?" "Yes." Tears slid down her cheeks. Someone must have overheard them. Someone must have known their quarrel would make Elliot a perfect suspect. Poirot stepped back, mind crackling with revelation. A quarrel, a witness, a plot to frame the nephew, a cufflink planted, and in the centre of it all, secrets Arthur Blackwood threatened to reveal. Poirot spoke, quietly, with grave clarity. "Madam, what was the secret?" Mrs. Ashcombe closed her eyes. "It wasn't Elliot's secret," she whispered. "It was Diana's." Poirot's heart thumped once, sharply. "And Elliot, he was protecting her!" "Yes," she breathed. In the silence that followed, the truth loomed like a storm cloud. But before Poirot could press further, a distant, echoing scream cut through the manor. High, terrified, female, Diana Marwood. Poirot turned, eyes blazing with sudden urgency. "Madame," he said, "stay here." And he sprinted toward the sound, for death, it seemed, was not finished with Blackwood Manor. Chapter 7 The scream in the gallery. The scream sliced through the manor like a blade of ice. Poirot pivoted sharply, his polished shoes skidding for a fraction of a second against the marble floor before he surged forward. His legs moved with surprising speed for a man of his age, driven by instinct and the unmistakable timbre of fear in Diana Marwood's voice. Up the staircase he climbed. Breath steady and precise, like a metronome ticking toward revelation. The second-floor gallery stretched ahead, a long, elegant corridor lined with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes watched with frozen judgment. Another scream echoed, shorter, choked, then abruptly cut off. Poirot's heart clenched. He reached the far end of the gallery and found the heavy door to Arthur's private library ajar. Candlelight flickered within, casting jittery shadows across the hallway. "Madame Marwood!" Poirot called, pushing inside. Diana stood near the towering windows, her hands braced against the pane, chest heaving. Her gown shimmered like liquid bronze under the candelabra's glow, but her face was as pale as ivory powder. Characters of strength often crumble like sand when confronted with truth, Poirot reflected. But Diana Marwood's expression was not simply terror. It was guilt wrestling with something far deeper. Dread. Poirot approached cautiously. "Madame, you cried out. What has occurred?" She turned toward him, trembling. I heard footsteps," she whispered, "behind me. But when I turned, no one was there." Poirot's eyes swept the room with a meticulous, predatory calm. Not a cushion displaced, not a drape stirred. Yet the air carried a subtle tremor, as if someone had only moments before slipped silently away. He stepped toward the bookshelves lining the far wall. One book lay slightly pulled forward, disturbed. A faint smear of dust along its spine indicated recent movement. Poirot murmured, "Someone was indeed here." Diana swallowed hard. I thought it was Arthur." Poirot's brows rose. "Arthur Blackwood is dead, madame." She shook her head, eyes glistening. "Not his body, his presence, ever since last night. I feel watched." Poirot regarded her with keen interest. "You believe the killer follows you?" Her lips parted, but she did not deny it. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, shifting his attention to the floor. The carpet bore faint impressions, footprints, large ones, made by a heavier man, fresh. He knelt. "Madame Marwood, you are correct. Someone was here with you in this room, only moments ago." She gasped softly, stepping backward until her shoulders hit the wall. Poirot stood. "There is something you must tell me, something Monsieur Elliot Graves sought to protect." Her breath hitched. "I don't know what he told you." "He said nothing," Poirot interrupted gently. "But his aunt has spoken. You have a secret. One Arthur Blackwood threatened to expose." Her entire posture stiffened. Poirot approached slowly, his voice low but insistent. "Madame, it is time. The killer circles his prey, and I must know what weapon he holds over you." Diana lowered her gaze to the rug, as though the embroidered flowers held the answers she feared to say aloud. Finally, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "Arthur discovered something about me, something from 6 years ago, something that could ruin me." Poirot said nothing, letting silence coax truth like a fisherman drawing in line. Diana continued, barely audible. "A man vanished. In Paris, he was a patron. Someone who took an interest in me. Too much interest." Her eyes clouded with memory. "One evening, he cornered me. He wouldn't let me leave." Poirot's expression did not change, but a shadow passed behind his eyes. I struggled. He fell, hit his head against the marble. There was blood, so much blood. Her voice wavered. I panicked. I fled. and the next day he was simply gone. No investigation, no body. The newspapers called it a disappearance. Poirot tapped his chin, and Arthur Blackwood knew. "Yes," she whispered, "he confronted me last week, said I owed him for his silence. He wanted money, influence. He wanted me." Poirot's eyes hardened. "And you refused?" "Of course I refused." Her voice cracked, anger mixed with shame. Poirot breathed in deeply. "Madame, this gives motive, yes, but not certainty. And it makes you vulnerable to blackmail, but not necessarily a murderer." Diana looked up sharply. "You think I killed him?" Poirot gave a small, unreadable smile. "I think you have not yet told me everything." Before she could respond, a sudden clatter echoed from the gallery outside. Diana flinched violently. Poirot raised a hand to reassure her, then strode to the door. The corridor lay empty, but a draught brushed his cheek. The window at the end of the gallery stood open, wide open, its curtains billowing as though something had just passed through. Poirot hurried toward it, peering down into the moonlit courtyard. Footprints marred the thin dusting of frost on the stone below. Fresh footprints, the same heavy size as those in the library. Poirot's pulse sharpened with focus. The killer had crept within, reach, watching, listening, testing the boundaries of fear, only to slip away in the moment of exposure. He stood silently, calculating. The manor was no longer a crime scene. It was a chessboard. And the opponent had just moved a knight. Poirot closed the window with a decisive snap and returned to Diana. She stood where he left her shaking. "Madame Marwood," he said gravely, "the killer is becoming bold. They wish to unsettle you, to unsettle everyone." Her voice trembled. "But why?" Poirot replied, "Because frightened people make mistakes, and someone in this house wishes to see you undone." Diana pressed a hand to her mouth. "Then I'm next." Poirot lifted a finger. "No, not while Hercule Poirot is here." Her eyes filled with tears. Poirot inclined his head. "But now, madame, you must do something for me." She looked up. "You must tell me the name of the man who disappeared in Paris." Her breath froze. Poirot's voice softened, but held implacable steel. "Because I believe that man and Arthur Blackwood are connected." Diana's lips parted, but before a single word could escape, footsteps thundered down the hallway. Colonel Whittaker burst into view, red-faced, panting. "Poirot! Come quickly! It's Elliot! He's gone!" Poirot stiffened. "Gone? How gone?" Whittaker shook his head, breathless. "His room! The window's smashed! There's blood on the sill!" Poirot's eyes narrowed, a cold fury settling into his bones. The killer had made another move. And this time, they had taken a living victim. Poirot turned, coat flaring behind him like the wings of a dark angel. "Bring me to his room at once," he commanded, for the game was no longer about revealing the murderer. It had become a race against death itself. Chapter 8. Blood on the Windowpane. The storm had broken fully by the time Poirot reached Elliot Graves's room. Rain lashed the tall corridor windows like frantic fingers pleading for entry, and thunder groaned over the moors with the slow rage of an ancient beast. The manor's lights flickered as though they too feared the darkness pressing closer with every passing hour. Poirot pushed open the door. The sight within froze even his breath. Elliot's room stood in chaotic disarray. Chairs overturned, papers scattered like white feathers, the mattress half pulled from the bedframe. But all of this paled against the central horror, the shattered window. Glass glittered on the carpet like cruel diamonds. And on the sill, in a jagged smear, blood. Poirot approached in measured steps. Colonel Whittaker hovered near the threshold, face pale beneath his military moustache. Behind him, Diana Marwood clutched her arms tightly, and Frederick Holt lingered restlessly in the hall, unable to look away. Poirot knelt beside the smeared blood and examined it closely. It was fresh. Warm, even. He touched a gloved fingertip to the trail leading down the outer wall. The drops descended several feet before fading into the darkness below. Poirot rose. This was no suicide. Monsieur Elliot was taken. Colonel Whittaker sputtered. But, good God, man, taken by whom? And why? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the broken window frame. The wood bore deep scratches, marks of forced entry, and in one section, faint fibres clung like the threads of a torn tapestry. Dark wool. Poirot plucked one between his fingers. Someone wearing a heavy coat climbed in, he murmured, or out. Diana's voice shook. But Elliot, why him? Poirot turned slowly, his expression grave, because Elliot Graves knew something vital. He hinted at a truth he would not speak. And now, someone wishes that truth erased. Holt shifted anxiously. But the blood? Is it enough to kill him? Poirot shook his head. No, it is a wound, perhaps inflicted to subdue him, or feign greater harm. But Elliot Graves lives, I am certain. Whittaker paced with agitation. Then we must search the grounds immediately. Poirot raised a hand sharply. Stop! That is what the killer wishes us to do. Scatter in desperation, blind in the dark. No, we must think. Poirot moved to Elliot's writing desk, scanning the scattered papers. Among them, he found a half-written letter addressed not to a person, but an establishment, the Montrose Asylum of Paris. Poirot's brows arched. Curious, he whispered. He unfolded the letter. The ink was fresh, the penstroke hurried. To the attending physician, in reference to subject L. Lenoir, new information has surfaced regarding his disappearance 6 years ago. I believe someone in this household. The sentence ended abruptly in a jagged line, the pen having torn through the paper. Poirot's heart lifted. Voila! The key! Diana stepped closer, trembling. Lenoir, she whispered. Louis Lenoir. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Ah, you know the name. A tear slipped down her cheek. It's the man who vanished, the man I told you about. Poirot exhaled softly. Then Elliot Graves was trying to tell us something very important indeed. Whittaker frowned. But what does a vanished Parisian patron have to do with Blackwood's death? Poirot looked at him steadily. Everything. He gestured for the others to sit. Listen carefully. We must reconstruct the chain of events. As the storm howled beyond the broken window, Poirot began pacing, the movement slow, deliberate, each step marking a thought. 6 years ago, a man named Louis Lenoir disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Madame Marwood encountered him on the night of his death, or supposed death. He fell, he bled, and afterward, nothing. A disappearance without a trace. Diana shuddered, as if reliving the terror. Poirot continued. Arthur Blackwood discovered the truth, or believed he did, enough to extort Madame, enough to gain leverage. He paused before the shattered window. Elliot, meanwhile, was connected to the institution where Louis Lenoir was last known to be under care, the Montrose Asylum. Why would Elliot communicate with them now? Because he found something linking Lenoir to this house. Holt swallowed. You think Lenoir isn't dead? Poirot lifted a finger. I think, Monsieur Holt, that the body was never found, and a body unseen is a truth unproven. A cold silence enveloped the group. Whittaker finally muttered, "Are you suggesting Lenoir might be alive? That he is the one responsible for all this?" Poirot's eyes glowed faintly in the candlelight. "I suggest that someone, either the killer or the victim, has lived a life under another name." Diana shook her head, disbelieving. "But Elliot, why would he hide something so important?" Poirot turned to her. "Because he feared someone. Elliot said he would do anything to protect the one he loved. A person with a dangerous past. A person whose secret, if revealed, could topple everything." His gaze swept across the room, sharp as a blade. "And Elliot was kidnapped before he could speak that name." Another crack of thunder echoed. Poirot approached the window, leaning out into the stormy night, scanning the courtyard below. The footprints, nearly washed away now, led toward the eastern gardens. He spoke softly, but with unmistakable conviction. This was not an act of panic. It was a removal, swift, planned, and purposeful. The kidnapper knew exactly where to strike. Whittaker huffed. "Then we must alert the authorities." "Soon," Poirot said, "but first we must finish Elliot's work." He turned back to the room, eyes fierce. "There is someone in this manor hiding behind a mask. Someone with ties to Louis Lenoir. Someone who fears the truth." Poirot held up the torn letter, and Elliot Graves paid the price for uncovering the final piece. Diana's voice trembled. "Then what do we do now?" Poirot stepped toward the door. "We set a trap," he said plainly, "to lure the killer into the open, and we begin tonight." He paused, his silhouette framed by candlelight. "For the murderer believes themselves the hunter." A faint smile curved Poirot's lips. "They have forgotten, mes amis. Hercule Poirot is always the one who hunts." Chapter 9. The Trap in the Conservatory. Night fell with a suffocating heaviness, the storm ebbing into a mist that clung to every stone of Blackwood Manor. In the hush after thunder, the house seemed to inhale, waiting, listening, poised like a beast crouched in darkness. Poirot stood in the grand conservatory, its vast glass walls reflecting the wavering candlelight. Outside, fog curled against the panes like pale hands seeking entry. This was where it would happen. The trap, the reveal, the confrontation. He adjusted his cuffs and surveyed the room with meticulous precision. Palm, fronds rustled in the faint draught. The marble fountain in the centre burbled with deceptive tranquillity, and in the far corner stood a single chair, placed deliberately beneath the chandelier's fractured glow. Poirot's stage. The others arrived in staggered whispers. First Diana Marwood, wrapped in a velvet shawl, her eyes rimmed with anxious exhaustion. Then Frederick Holt, shoulders tense, frown etched deep as granite. Finally, Colonel Whittaker, jaw clenched, determined to project strength despite the unease curling through him. Poirot lifted a hand. "Please, mes amis, no raised voices, no sudden movements. We begin." Whittaker exhaled sharply. "Poirot, if this is one of your theatrics, it is not theatrics," Poirot said simply. "It is necessity." He stepped into the centre of the conservatory, framed by the murmur of the fountain and the echoing stillness of night. "The killer is among us," Poirot began. "We stand closer to them than we realise. Arthur Blackwood's murder was not an isolated act. It was the second chapter in a story that began 6 years ago, with the disappearance of Louis Lenoir." Diana flinched. Holt gripped the back of a chair. Whittaker stiffened, though Poirot sensed his confusion was genuine. Poirot continued, "The thread tying this tragedy together is not merely blackmail. It is identity. Someone in this house is not who they pretend to be." He let silence settle, heavy and electric. When Elliot Graves wrote to the Montrose Asylum, Poirot said. He sought confirmation of a suspicion that someone under this roof had once been connected to that institution. And now Elliot has vanished. Holt stepped forward. Poirot, you keep saying someone has a hidden identity. Then who? Who could possibly? Poirot turned sharply. Patience, Monsieur Holt. The truth must be revealed in order. He gestured toward the glass wall. Earlier today, I examined the footprints outside Elliot's window. They led toward the east gardens, but curiously, there were no returning prints. Not because they washed away, but because the kidnapper re-entered the house through another point. Diana gasped. Through the conservatory. Poirot nodded. Oui, madame. The broken lock on the side door is no accident. Our kidnapper is agile, strong, and deeply familiar with the manor's forgotten entrances. Whitaker folded his arms. But what of Lenoir? You suggest he is alive. Do you have proof? Poirot's voice dropped to a low, steady murmur. The Montrose Asylum housed patients under numbers, not names. One such patient, number 47, suffered dissociative episodes and severe memory lapses after trauma. He vanished from the institution 6 years ago. The same night Lenoir disappeared. A flicker of fear crossed Diana's face. Poirot saw it but continued. When I inspected Elliot Graves's room, he said, I found medical files hidden beneath his floorboard, files belonging to patient 47, someone Elliot tried desperately to protect. The door behind them creaked softly. Everyone turned. A figure stood there, gaunt, dishevelled and trembling. Elliot Graves, alive, but barely. His shirt was torn, dried blood at his temple, eyes wild with exhaustion. He clutched the doorway as if the very air was too heavy to bear. Diana gasped, Elliot! Poirot strode to him, steadying his arm. Mon ami, sit. Elliot shook his head violently. No, Poirot, no time. He followed me. He's here. Who is here? Whitaker demanded. Who attacked you? Elliot's eyes swept the room, searching faces, calculating danger. Then he fixed his gaze on Diana, or rather, through Diana. His voice broke. I tried to protect him all these years, but he's losing control again. Diana's voice trembled. Who, Elliot? Who are you talking about? Elliot opened his mouth, but the lights flickered violently. A shadow moved behind the tall fern. Poirot spun. Come out, he commanded. The game ends now. Slow footsteps emerged. Holt's breath caught. Diana's hand flew to her mouth. Whitaker swore under his breath. The man who stepped forward wore a dark coat soaked with mist. His face, narrow, haunted, half hidden by unkempt curls, was startlingly familiar. Because it was the face from the Paris newspapers. Louis Lenoir, or what remained of him. Diana staggered backward. No, you can't be. Lenoir's eyes locked onto her, filled with a storm of recognition and fury. You left me, he whispered. You let me bleed. You left me for dead. Poirot raised a hand. Monsieur Lenoir, listen to me. Violence will solve nothing. But Lenoir shook, trembling. The fractured shards of a mind torn between memory and madness. Elliot stepped forward, voice breaking. Louis, please, you're safe now. You don't have to. Safe? Lenoir spat. He found out. His trembling finger stabbed the air toward the absent Arthur Blackwood. He knew who I was, what she did. He wanted to use me. Diana sobbed. It was an accident, I swear. Lenoir lunged toward her. Holt intercepted him, grabbing his arm. Lenoir snarled like a wounded animal. Poirot raised his voice, sharp and commanding. Louis Lenoir! Lenoir froze. Poirot stepped closer, voice softening but unwavering. Look at me! You were not murdered that night. You survived, but you were broken and abandoned. Arthur Blackwood saw value in your suffering. He used you, manipulated you. Poirot's eyes glinted. But who killed him, Louis? It was not Diana, not Elliot, not any of us. Lenoir's expression shifted, anger cracking into confusion. Poirot leaned in. "Tell me, mon pauvre ami, who struck the blow?" Lenoir's lips parted. But before the truth could emerge, the conservatory lights died in a violent burst. Darkness swallowed the room. Chapter 10. The final illumination. Darkness fell like a velvet shroud. For one breathless heartbeat, the conservatory was nothing but chaos. The scrape of a chair overturned. A stifled cry, the shallow panting of frightened lungs. Poirot stood utterly still. Letting sound guide him, the storm outside flashed faint lightning through the fogged glass, casting pale, broken silhouettes across the crowded room. Then, thump! A body collapsing. A gasp silenced mid-breath. "Stay where you are," Poirot commanded. "No one moves!" The lights flickered once, twice, then surged back to life. The scene snapped into clarity. Frederick Holt stood over Louis Lenoir, whose hands were bound by a fallen vine trellis, as though someone had tackled him and improvised restraints in the dark. Diana Marwood clung to a marble pillar, trembling but unharmed. Colonel Whitaker stared around wildly, fists raised, searching for an unseen assailant. Elliot Graves lay on the floor, conscious, breathing, but dazed. A shallow cut bled across his forehead. Poirot exhaled a slow, controlled breath. "Is anyone gravely hurt?" he asked. Murmured no's circled the room. Good, then the killer had not acted to murder, but to escape. Or disguise themselves. Poirot stepped forward, focus sharpening. "Mes amis," he said quietly, "the moment has come. We shall end this nightmare." He looked from face to face before settling his gaze on Lenoir, still trembling beneath the fallen trellis. "Louis Lenoir is not our murderer." A stunned silence followed. Whitaker gaped. "Not, but he attacked." "He attacked out of fear and madness," Poirot cut in gently. "He has suffered enough. Non, mon colonel. The true killer hides behind sanity, not madness." Diana pressed a hand to her chest. "Then who? Who killed Arthur?" Poirot turned, the answer already shining in his eyes. "The killer," he declared, "is the one who had the most to lose, the one who orchestrated every detail, the one who used Lenoir's instability as a shield." Poirot walked slowly toward a man who had been still, too still, through the entire ordeal. Colonel Whitaker stiffened. Me," he stuttered. "Poirot, this is outrageous." Poirot lifted a single accusing finger. "Non, mon colonel. I refer to someone else entirely." Whitaker sagged with relief. Poirot pivoted, toward Frederick Holt. Holt stared at him bewildered. "Poirot, what nonsense is this?" Poirot's voice was calm, lethal. "You, Monsieur Holt, are the killer." Diana gasped. Elliot blinked in shock. Holt almost laughed. On what possible grounds? Poirot clasped his hands. "Firstly, motive. You claimed Arthur Blackwood blackmailed you. This was true, but what you neglected to say was why he blackmailed you." Poirot nodded toward Elliot. "Elliot Graves tried to protect someone. You, Monsieur Holt, tried to silence someone. Arthur Blackwood, who had learned your secret." Holt's eyes flashed, a crack in. "Composure." Poirot continued. 6 years ago, Louis Lenoir disappeared. The world believed it an accident, a fall, a death, but someone helped hide the body, or rather, hide the man. He looked at Diana. "Madame, you fled in panic believing you had killed him. But it was Holt who discovered the weakened Lenoir first." Diana gasped. "Holt?" "Yes," Poirot said. "He recognized opportunity. Lenoir was wealthy, well-connected, a man whose family would pay well for continued care, or silence. Holt used his contacts to deliver Lenoir to Montrose Asylum under an assumed identity, and he has collected payments ever since. Whittaker choked. Extortion? Poirot nodded. The very career Holt abandoned, law enforcement, gave him ample knowledge of missing persons cases. Lenoir became his income. Holt's jaw tightened. Poirot, you are weaving madness. Poirot ignored him. Then Arthur Blackwood discovered the truth. He threatened to expose Holt, not Diana. Arthur was never interested in her secret. It was Holt's scheme that gave him true leverage. Poirot's voice sharpened, and so Holt killed him. Elliot struggled to sit up. But the footprint, the confrontation, fabrications, Poirot said. Holt staged the confrontation. He ensured he would be seen walking the grounds, and then he planted evidence to frame Diana, or any other vulnerable target. Holt's mask finally cracked. Poirot pressed on. When Lenoir escaped the asylum, his memory broken, he came searching for Diana, the only face he remembered. Arthur seized that opportunity, playing both sides. But you, Monsieur Holt. Poirot stepped closer, eyes like steel. You could not let Arthur expose your crime, so you struck him down. Diana stared, horrified. But what about Elliot? Why kidnap him? Poirot turned to her because Elliot found the files. Because Elliot learned that patient 47 was in truth Louis Lenoir. Because Elliot meant to tell us the truth tonight. Poirot looked directly at Holt. And so you attacked him, just as you attacked Lenoir 6 years ago. Silence flooded the conservatory, thick and breathless. Then Holt's expression twisted into something dark, unmasked, unmistakably guilty. You clever little man, he hissed, always so certain. Poirot said nothing. Holt lunged toward the conservatory door. Whittaker tackled him instantly. A violent struggle ensued, ending with Holt pinned beneath the colonel's weight, wrists secured with a length of discarded rope. Breathing hard, Whittaker rose. Poirot, you magnificent devil, you were right. Poirot gave a modest shrug. It is an old habit. Diana released a trembling sob. Elliot leaned against a column, exhausted but relieved. Lenoir, still shaking, was helped gently to his feet. Poirot approached him softly. You are safe now, Monsieur Lenoir. Your suffering ends. There will be treatment, protection. Lenoir's eyes filled with fragile gratitude. Poirot nodded, quietly moved. Later, as dawn broke over the moors with fragile gold, Poirot stood on the veranda, watching mist retreat across the heather. Whittaker joined him. It's over, Poirot. Poirot smiled faintly. No, mon ami. It is concluded. He breathed in the scent of wet earth and distant morning fire. Justice, Poirot murmured, is never over, but today she is satisfied. He adjusted his cuffs, turned from the rising sun, and stepped back into the manor, ready to restore order to a house that had known too much darkness. A scream tore through the black. Then silence.